Hey there YouTube, this is Will C. White. Welcome to Ask a Maestro. Today's question comes from At the Good Death, aka Caitlin Doty, who asks, why do symphonies have numbers? Well, Caitlin, I can help you out. The basic answer to this question is just that when we call something like Mozart's 35th Symphony, that's because it's the 35th symphony that Mozart wrote. Obvious. But let's take this question a little bit further. Why should I care if Mozart's 35th symphony came after his 34th or his 36th, if all I want to do is listen to the music? Well, I'm glad that you pursued this line of questioning, because this is where it gets interesting and sort of philosophical. See, we are used to music that has names. If you go into iTunes or onto Spotify or onto YouTube and you're looking up a song that you want to listen to, you look up its name, obviously. And of course, song names are logical. They have something to do with what's in the lyrics. Take, for example, one of my favorite songs, Beyoncé's Single Ladies. Why is it called Single Ladies? Well, obviously because Single Ladies is in the lyrics like 100 times right at the beginning of the song. I mean, I don't think that there was a meeting where they were sitting around and they were saying, you know, this is a really great song. What should we call it? I don't know. Play it again. It's just too ineffable. Let's not even give it a title. But in the case when music doesn't have words, this is exactly what we're up against. If Single Ladies was just this, and it went on that way for the 3 minutes of its entire duration, what would you call it? Would it make sense to call it Single Ladies? Or couldn't you just call it, say, Beyoncé's dance music number 32? But this is the exact situation that we're in when it comes to classical music, because of course there are no words in a purely instrumental composition. Speaking of which, now is the time on Ask a Maestro when we listen to music. Here is a little bit of one of my favorite symphonies, Mozart's 35th. So what should this be called? I mean, we can describe the music. The beginning to me sounds very sort of noble and stately, and then I think it goes into music that's a little bit more poignant or tender, and then there's something kind of playful, and then it goes back to that more stately character. And that's all in the first 15 seconds of the music. So what one word would encapsulate that? You know, when musicians think about music, we tend to think of it as a language, and for us, it's more descriptive and more specific than any word could ever get. It communicates more deeply and more accurately about emotions and thoughts. But some composers do give their symphonies names. For example, Beethoven called his Third Symphony the Eroica, means heroic. Alan Hovhaness called his Second Symphony the Mysterious Mountain. Now there's a very evocative title, but it doesn't really get to what the music is, even though it might suggest a way of listening to it or thinking about it. In the case of the music that we were just listening to a minute ago, Mozart called his 35th Symphony the Hofner. But that has precisely zero to do with the music, because he only called it that because the guy who paid for the symphony was a rich guy whose name happened to be Hofner. Now, if every composer named every one of their symphonies, then we could just go along and refer to symphonies by their names. But that's not the case. Composers seem not to have been tempted to name their symphonies, at least not all of them. And I think that the reason for this is what we were saying before, about how music is such a descriptive language in itself. Why would you put something on top of that that's less descriptive, like a word? So instead, we're left with this system of using descriptors and numbers. Here's an important point that I'd like to make though. Symphony number 35 is not a title. If anything, Hofner is a title, even though it's sort of a stupid one. Symphony number 35 is a descriptor. The word symphony tells us that the piece of music that we're going to hear is for an orchestra, as opposed to, say, solo piano or a chamber ensemble. And it tells us a little something about the way in which the music is going to be organized. For example, in Mozart's day, a symphony meant that the music was going to be organized into 4 movements with a certain structure of which ones are fast and which ones are slow. The last thing I'll say about using this convention of symphony and number is that it appeals to people who are interested in classical music because we tend to be interested in history, or at least in the development of a composer's style and musical language. So for us, it is interesting to hear the way that Mozart was writing in his 31st Symphony, as opposed to his 35th Symphony, as opposed to his 41st Symphony. We can track a progression of what sort of musical ideas Mozart was working with and thinking about. All right, YouTube, that's it for this edition of Ask a Maestro. Leave your musical questions in the comments, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. Between now and then, go play an instrument or sing a song. And until then, goodbye, everyone.